Hey, what is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. It's time for another NTRL video, the racing league that I founded in 2022 to give everyone a fair chance at clean racing inside Gran Turismo 7. The main aim being that sport mode sometimes can be a little too, I guess, on the dirty side, and here we can have an open league for everybody from, I guess, A+ all the way down to the D rankings and below. Now there's a few changes to this Sunday league. We are mainly going to be running Group 2 machinery, so we've gone from Group 1 to Group 2 to hopefully make the racing closer and overall improve it. There will be 4 teams of 4 drivers, so 4 manufacturers made up of 4 drivers, which are from a driver tier system based on previous year results as well as overall pace. In terms of the format for the races, it will be a 15-minute qualifying session, which will set the grid for a 15-minute sprint race, which will be ran on the racing soft tyres. That will then set the grid for a 60 to 90-minute endurance race, which can feature everything from both fuel usage, tyre wear and weather if the track deems that it can be used. Whilst there's obviously the, I guess, achievement of getting the overall championship in this, it is all about getting your team together, rallying together and getting that team's championship as well. So there is points on offer for both individual as well as your driver tier and the team itself. Speaking about teams, let's meet them. So up for Honda, this is the first manufacturer and this will be my car for the season. This is perhaps one of the better cars of the bunch, however it does have a few downsides. Whilst it's very fast and very nimble and feels, I guess, much different from the other GT500 machinery on offer, it does have the downside that if you do overdrive it, I have found that the NSX does like to chew up the tyres a lot more than some of the other GT500 machinery. However, I do expect Honda to be very high up the grid, especially on the more technical tracks on the calendar. Next up is going to be Nissan. This is going to be the GTR GT500 from 2016. Again, a bit different to the Honda machinery. It also feels much bigger overall and doesn't really have the nimbleness of the NSX. Again, a very fast car. It does seem to have one of the better overall top speeds, almost in line with the Lexus. However, it does have the, I guess, upside of being very, very good on its tyres. You can pretty much rag this car to no end and it won't chew the rubber up. So that's going to bring me into my third manufacturer of the season. This is Lexus. They will be running the GT500 2016 model. Of course, that is the main theme around this championship for this season. Again, in terms of Lexus, it's a very track dependent car. It's very, very quick when it's not running with too much tyre wear on. In fact, it does have unbelievable pace at a lot of circuits. However, a downside for this car, unlike the GTR, it will chew up its tyres, I guess, much more easily than what we do see with the Nissan. So a very hit and miss car. If you can get your head around this one, it can be very, very powerful. And then finally, we have a DTM machine. This is the Audi RS5 DTM. Running to the same similar spec as the GT500 machines, this is the fourth and final manufacturer. Bit of a strange one, it doesn't really fit in with the rest. Whilst I'd probably say it's more akin to the Lexus, it does have a DRS system and is known to be incredibly quick in a straight line once it gets going. However, a very track dependent car nonetheless. And that is going to be all 4 of the manufacturers to be running this season. So let's take a look around round 1, which is going to take place at the full layout of Suzuka circuit. We're going to head out there with our safety car to take a look at some of the key areas of the track. So at first you've got that big long run down to turn 1. Now it's very, very deceiving. It is much quicker than it actually looks. Whilst you can't really see it with the safety car, it's a very awkward turn. It's very fast on entry before tightening up and once again getting the throttle down ready for the S's. Now this is probably the place where it is very make or break for a lot of the faster lap times. Again, the trouble with Suzuka is that it's very difficult to get any real overtaking done, so it is all going to be about track position and then making the most under pit stops and such if you do want to move up the grid. Overtaking through the S's is definitely not advised, but it's very, very crucial in terms of getting those faster laps in and making up any time you may have lost at turn 1. You then have this sweeping left-hander, which is going to take you into probably one of the most awkward awkward sections once again, this double right-hander. Again, if you clip the curb a little bit wrong, you can be sent into the gravel and sent spinning, but you want to essentially aim to get up on the curb and back in for the second right-hander. Again, run it wide and get a nice run up to this very awkward hairpin. If you've done the NSX license test originally when Gran Turismo came out, this corner is notorious for being a massive pain. Again, very crucial for getting a lot of decent time on the board. Then this part of the track feels like it goes on for absolutely ever. You're going to be lining yourself up for a double left-hander. It's a very strange one because again, you're coming into entry very quickly. You're going to have to brake and then bring the car nice and wide before trying to line up the tighter left-hander on the exit. Again, very much like turn 1 where it's very fast in and then slower on exit, but you do want to obviously keep the momentum going and run it out as wide as possible, ready for this notorious section. Again, the fast left-hander, get it wrong, you can go flying into the sort of gravel traps and the exits there on the tarmac. Again, lining up the right-left section to finish off your lap. Again, very crucial here. And then in reality, you do want to stick to the right-hand side. This will chop a lot of time off of your lap, especially in qualifying. So stick as close to the barrier as possible, and that is going to complete a lap of Suzuka. Okay, so round 1 of the season is going to be our sprint race. It is myself on pole, so I'm going to take away the bonus point for that pole position. Shikata lines up P2 in the Lexus. Very good pace in that car. Again, when it's not under too heavy tyre wear, that thing is very quick. Also, the GTR in the background getting a great start, getting pushed a little bit wide there by the Lexus. However, he is then going to drop even further back as the second Honda of Jace manages to sneak his way through. So again, a lot of carnage going off. We have a car spinning in the background there. We also looked like that we had a Lexus that sort of spun it up on the starting grid, so not quite sure what happened there. It did look like that car got going again. I believe that may have been Pedro down in P13, and it's looking like it was Animal Daryl who got the spin there coming out of turn 2. So let's head over and have a look at the starting grid on board Daryl here. So let's see what actually happened. He gets underway fairly quite decently. However, the rear does spin up. It looks like he takes a bit of a knock there, as we can see the other Lexus of Pedro spinning on the right hand side of the screen. He approaches turn 1. It's very clear at this point. However, there's a few cars off there, looking like one of the Hondas getting taken out there. He then goes to put the power down and just spins the rear up. So yeah, a bit unfortunate for Daryl there, getting I guess the brunt of the start there. So didn't get away too good and then ended up spinning it at the exit of that second part of the turn. So let's have a look from the outboard camera at the rest of the carnage on the grid. So yeah, it was Pedro that got spun around in Lexus. We also saw Stee as well, not getting away too cleanly in the Audi, and then we can also see Sal there giving Jody a bit of a kick up the rear and running her wide, which ended up causing Daryl a spin. Onto lap 3 though, it was Honda leading the way by a fair decent margin at this point. So Honda looking very racy and very quick. It is obviously their home track at Suzuka, so as expected, you'd expecting that manufacturer to be doing very well here. A little bit further down the grid, we have Timo leading the way from the GTR of Mira. Again, after getting pushed wide on the first corner of lap 1, he's really kind of struggling to get himself, you know, back in the momentum of this fight. So unfortunate for Nissan there, not performing too well. In P6 we do have Braggy, who is having his own little battle really with Punisher's Ace. Again, those two are going to be pretty much inseparable for the sprint race. A quiet race for Jody. She's sitting in a very good P8, definitely putting the Honda to use. She is chased down by her teammate in the 4th Honda of Tommy Hawk. Again, all Hondas in the top 10, so very good for them. Daryl is on a bit of a recovery drive, currently up to P10 in the Lexus. Nizam, not a great race for him. He is currently down in P11, followed by his teammate Professor Smiles in P12. P13, Steve is on a bit of a recovery drive in the Audi, so he's trying to get his way through that grid. And then we have another GTR in P14 of DWG. Pedro sits P15, and last but not least is going to be Sal on his stand-in debut for the Group 2s in the final Audi of the race. On to lap 5 now, and we are just over the halfway point of this race. We're looking down towards the rear of the grid with Darrell, who has once again begun to drop places, and it's going to get no better from there as he runs it wide, ends up in the gravel, and manages to drop all the way back down the field. Unfortunate for him, again, the Lexus does have pace here, but he's just not managing to kind of, I guess, gel with it, at least so far. A little bit later on, the battle continued on with both Braggy and Ace Punisher. It is Audi versus Lexus. This battle has been raging on for the entire race, and unfortunately Ace is going to get it with a bit of a knock to the Audi there, so Braggy losing a ton of time as he runs it wide into the gravel trap. On to lap 8, we are coming to the closing stages of this race, and the Honda is basically in cruise mode at this point, and that is allowing Shikata to close up the gap. A massive gap between the front two and the rest of the field. Jace currently leads away in P3. Mira did manage to get himself to P4, and now Timo has dropped his way back to P5 and a little bit off the rest of the pack. Punisher's Ace sits in P6 after that contact with Braggy, who runs in P7. P8 once again is Jodie, followed by her teammate Tommy Hawk, as all Hondas end up inside the top 10. Rounding out the top 10 though is going to be the GTR Nismo of TCR Nizam, who is once again battling away with Professor Smiles, who's going to put it down the inside and end up knocking his teammate wide. So tension already in the Nissan camp, as we already have teammates knocking each other off track. Steve sits P12, Pedro P13, Darrell trying to recover in P14, P15 is DWG in the final of the GTRs, and Sal still remains in P16 and last overall. So finishing up the sprint race, it is going to be the Honda who took an early lead and is going to take the win for round 1. Shikata in the Lexus in P2, so good result for Lexus so far. In P3, is it going to be Jace who holds on? It absolutely is, so P3 for him. The first of the GTRs of Mira ends up in P4. P5 for the first of the Audis, with Timo taking away that top 5 position. Punisher's Ace is going to take P6 in this race, and Braggy is going to take P7 after his contact earlier on. Unfortunate for him, he did have great pace in that Audi. P8 is going to go to the rest of the NSX team, so we have P8 and P9, which is going to be both of the Hondas of Jody and Tommy Hawk. All Hondas inside the top 10, so, you know, pretty great for my team at least so far. P10, and rounding out that one, is not going to be Professor Smiles. He is eventually going to let Nizam pass at the line, so congratulations to Nizam for rounding out the top 10, and fair game to Professor for allowing him to retake that position. Steed takes P12, P13 goes to Darrell, an awful race for him unfortunately. P14 goes to Pedro, P15 is going to go to the way of DWG in the final of the GTR Nismos. He is going to end up boxing it in though as he crosses the line, and that is going to give a P16 to Sal, who finishes last, but a decent effort on his first ever stand-in. So it's time for the main feature race of today. This was originally scheduled to be a 90-minute race. Unfortunately, due to time constraints and a few connection issues and the loss of Timo, it ended up being a 60-minute race in the end. So it's going to be the Honda that gets us away, Lexus running in P2, Jace in the second Honda P3, Mira P4, Braggy already up to P5, as we see Tommy Hawk going all the way off after his superb sprint race. So he's going to be fairly unfortunate with that. Hopefully he can make a comeback from that one, but again, Honda leading the way and looking very, very strong at their home track. So expecting Honda to do well, but again, tyre wear could come into this one. There is rain to be expected in this race, but again, the rain system in this game can be very hit and miss. So looking down the rest of the grid, we do have Nizam, who's got himself up to P6 already, so a good start for him. Jody already improving from her starting position in P7. Professor Smile sits in P8, as we see Pedro going wide there and off the track. Punisher ends up in a P9, so he's dropped back a fair margin really on this race start. So unfortunate for him, I'm sure he's got the pace to get through the grid. P10 is the GTR of DWG. P11 is going to be Darrell. Then we have Stee, and then we also have a second Audi, or the final Audi of I believe that's Sal, yeah, so Sal there. And then we have Tommy Hawk, who again is on that recovery drive as Pedro going off once again, this time at the hairpin. So unfortunate for him, only 15 Alpine cars starting this race, obviously with the loss of Timo. Shikata was eventually chasing down the NSX, but did run it wide, so different strategies on some of these cars. The NSX out front of myself is on softs, the majority of the other cars are on mediums. As we see Braggy then trying to go around the outside of Shikata, who made the mistake, and then ends up making a mistake himself. So yeah, unfortunate for him, getting a bunch of dirty tyres there. So a little bit later on, it was Honda leading the way really by a decent margin. Obviously different strategies coming into play, so we are expecting the Honda to be very quick in the opening stint. Differing strategies and split strategies between all of the Honda cars. So we saw Jace there on the mediums, he's keeping pace with the GTR, which is currently running in P2. Braggy a little bit further down is one of the other cars that is on the racing soft compound of tyre. A little bit further down, plenty of battles going. Jody has begun to drop down a little bit, as we see Professor sitting in P8, and we also saw the Lexus of Ace Punisher starting to move his way up the grid. DWG sits a little bit further back in kind of his own race at this point, a bit in no man's land. He is followed by Sal. Then we also have Steve, who is in P12, just trying to close down his teammate there. Tommy Hawk trying to make his comeback through the grid in P13, followed by Daryl, and once again Pedro, who is quite far off the pace and sort of stranded in his own little race there. So it's time for the first pit stops, and obviously it would be the soft runners to go in first at the end of lap 8, mainly my NSX and the RS5 Turbo DTM of Braggy, who was also on the soft compound of tyres. However, some of the medium runners did also pit, mainly the GTRs. Whilst that car is usually pretty good on its tyres, it seems like some people were struggling, but again this could be due to the obviously battling going on or getting them dirty and running through the gravel and such, which can cause a bit of extra wear. So very much seeming like these softs and mediums really aren't too far off each other. We also see one of the other soft runners, that is Jody in the NSX. She's also pitting in for a set of mediums. Now you can have an open tyre choice. If you want to run softs throughout the race, then you can do that. However, probably the best strategy here would be a soft, medium, and then soft again at the end if you can drag the fuel out a little bit. However, you will lose a ton of pace turning the engine down on these GT500 machines. As we see Jody exiting the pit, she is going to come out in P13, but a bunch of cars also ready to pit. As we see Mira come out a little bit later on at the start of lap 10, he is going to drop down to P3, and in terms of myself, I did manage to get the undercut done on him and give myself a nice little breathing room to the GTR there. However, we do have Jace, who was out in front. He did eventually pit, so after everyone had managed to pit for the first time, we do see that the NSX does still maintain its lead with two GTRs up next. So we have the GTR of Mira, then we have one that did pit early, that is Nizam in P3, so he's having a very good drive here with his current strategy. P4 is Braggy in the RS5, the first of the Audis. He is followed by Jace, who did pit last, so he's probably going to have a charge up the field there in the second of the NSX machine, so not bad from him, and I'm pretty sure he will get a rush on as his stint goes on. We also then see the likes of Professor and Punisher's Ace, who are also running well in this field. Shikata having a bit of a shocker here. As you can see, he is on a completely different strategy from anyone else, running the racing hard compound of tyre. He's all the way down in P8. P9 is Jody having a relatively quiet race. She is followed by DWG in one of the GTRs. Daryl, again, not a great race for him. A lot of the Lexus drivers either love that car or absolutely hate it, and it does seem that the likes of both Daryl and Shikata are just not gelling with it, at least around Suzuka, whereas people like Ace Punisher are having an absolutely great time. A couple of Audis at the rear here in P13 and P14, with Pedro continuing to be last in the Lexus again, although he does seem to be getting his sort of head around that one. So as you can see, Daryl, although he was struggling in the Lexus, got a brilliant move pulled off here on the GTR of DWG, who will then just kind of give up the chase and go in and pit. He is followed by a bunch of other cars, as well as I think that was Nizam in the background after his pit stop. And then teammates collided as Steve absolutely wipes out Sauer, who I believe did get pushed by one of the lapping cars. I believe Mira did end up pushing Sauer wide, and Steve just unfortunately ended up collecting his teammate there. So both of the Audis not having a great day here at Suzuka. So a little bit later on in the race, around about 2/3 almost, and as you can see, rain was beginning to loom around the track of Suzuka. It was due to happen. However, at this point in time, it seems either do an extra pit stop or try and drag it out and wait for the rain. At this point in time, it was on the radar to actually hit the track, but did end up moving away. So a lot of cars at this point, especially myself, was running fuel mix 6 and just trying to get slip off of anyone they could. As you can see, DWG unlapping himself there, the racing mediums on the Honda completely dead, and the fuel almost gone. So at that point, we're just trying to drag ourselves along. People like Jace though in a decent place. He is on the mediums and does have a bit of extra fuel. Mira has the racing softs. He did end up pitting earlier than expected, so he has risked it for that extra pit stop. Again, people like myself are just waiting for the rain to come. As we see Shikata in P4 on the racing hards. Another car that's waiting it out is Ace Punisher, who currently sits in P5, and you can see down the grid, we did actually end up getting a bit of rain coming over, and a few of the cars did actually pit to try and cover it off with a set of intermediates. However, it just didn't go too well. So yeah, a bit unfortunate for those that did pit for the intermediates, because in the end the rain didn't actually settle as much as expected. It did come down for a almost lightning quick flash, and then it was completely gone and dried up within a matter of seconds, as we can see some of the cars beginning to pit as well. So it was just a bit of a strange time really, and again it's all down to the weird weather of Gran Turismo that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So you may notice cars on completely random tyres that don't actually relate to where they should be in terms of the actual strategy at the moment. So eventually both Hondas did pit on the same lap, so both myself and Jace pitted in, and this would allow Mira to take the lead. Unfortunately, at this point we'd realised that the rain just wasn't actually going to fully come, so it was just a case of we had to pit, and it was a case of trying to see what tyre compound we should go on. So at this point for the Hondas, it was racing mediums to get it to the end and fill it up for fuel. However, at this point it did allow Mira to go through not only on the soft compound of tyre, but also with a fairly big margin, considering a lot of the cars had just kind of sat around for what felt like the longest time in fuel mix 6, as we see some cars still managing to go on racing hards and racing softs. So Mira really let this one play into his hands, and he is basically running away with this one. However, if he drives it too aggressively, there is a chance that he might have to make an extra pit stop, but at this point he is pretty much a guaranteed winner. As we look further down the grid, myself and Jace did come out in P4 and P5. So, in terms of the ongoing battle, this is where it got a little bit awkward. So again, you may notice that some cars are on completely random tyres that don't actually relate to their strategy. As you can see, the rain should have been coming, so cars like Shikata were on the intermediates and having to drag them out for as long as possible before swapping back over. So yeah, a very weird time, as we also see one of the cars now pitting in to take them off. I believe that was Daryl there. So just really kind of all over the place at this point. The weather just not working for some teams, the strategy is just not working for some teams, and cars very randomly placed. So Mira did eventually end up using up his tyres and using up too much fuel, meaning 8 minutes from the end he did end up pitting, and that will allow the NSX once again to go back through and go into the lead. However, would he manage to get himself out in front of Jace? He absolutely would. So he did manage to slot himself just behind in P2, but does pick up a pit lane penalty for cutting the entrance or exit of the pit, and unfortunately for him that would be his race gone. Eventually the softs completely won on the NSX, but it would be myself that manages to win the first Endurance Group 2 event of the season. Mira is going to end up taking second, not having to do the extra lap in the end, but he does take away P2. Unfortunate for him, again the strategy just not working out. Jace P3. P4 is going to go to a very great drive by Ace Punisher. P5 goes to Braggy, a great drive by him. We see Professor Smiles having a spin, and he does manage to recover it to P7. So Shikata in the end did take P6 away from him. We then have the NSX concept of Tommy Hawk, who rounds up in P8, with P9 going to the GTR Nismo of Nizam, who ran himself out of fuel, but does manage to get himself in the top 10. Rounding out the top 10, a quiet race for Jodie. She does make sure that all Hondas get inside that top 10. We then saw the likes of Daryl and DWG upwards of P12. P13 went to Stee. Pedro does recover himself after that awful start to P14. Sal ends up in a respectable P15. Driver standing time then, let's have a look after round 1 of both a sprint and endurance. P1 is myself on 48 points, P2 is J Mira on 40, P3 is Jace consistent as ever on 39, P4 is Shikata on 36, again that endurance race just kind of, catching him out there. P5 is Punisher on 34, 6th is Braggy on 31, 7th Professor Smiles on 23, 8th is Tomahawk on 23 once again, P9 is Nizam on 20, who is level on points with Jody in P10, P11 is Animal Daryl on 12 points, in 12th is Timo on 12 points after not being able to make it for the endurance race due to connection issues. P13 is Stee on 9, P14 is DWG on 8, 15th Pedro 6, and 16th is Sal, taking away 3 points from round 1, and that is going to complete the drivers standing after both the sprint and endurance. Whilst it's looking like a bit of a runaway for Honda in terms of the team with 130 points, both times in both the sprint and endurance getting all 4 cars inside that top 10. Nissan sit on 91 points in P2, Lexus on 78 in P3, and finally Audi on 55 in the 4th position. However, again, Timo not being able to contest that endurance race probably does mean that they lost a fair few chunk of points there, and that is going to complete the team's standings for round 1 at Suzuka. So a bit of a strange one when it comes to Suzuka. There was supposed to be weather, there was supposed to be downpours, but it didn't exactly happen. However, it was a great time, and I thank everybody who took part in this race, as well as you guys watching at home. If you do want to take part, I'll have all the relevant links down below in the description. We have 3 championships available. So we have the Group 3 on a Saturday, that is running every other Saturday, Group 2 every other Sunday, and now a VGT Trophy League, which runs every other Thursday. Anyway, massive thank you for watching. Let's roll the highlights from round 1 at Suzuka. Peace.